Today I wanted to talk briefly about how we as Christians can approach the issue of creation and evolution. As Christians, we tend to think that anyone who believes that the universe is millions or even billions of years old has somehow compromised or altogether rejected their belief in the Bible. But I do not think this is a fair criticism, for the Bible on such issues just isn't clear. But this is obviously to be expected, for the creation story isn't there to give dates, rather it is there to paint a picture of how glorious our God really is. When we talk about creation, we can of course go to the account in Genesis 1, the first verse of which says, "In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth." And even in that one verse there are a number of things to note. The first thing to mention is that it happened in the beginning, which means we simply don't know when it happened. We just know that it was in the beginning. It also means that we should not be so adamant about one position or the other in terms of the age of the universe. Rather, we should be open to following the evidence where it would lead us. The second thing to mention is that it was God who created. Although we do not know when these things happened, we can be sure that God was the agent of them. As I mentioned in my last question, in order for space, time and matter to come into existence, there would need to be something outside, something or someone outside of those to bring about their existence. Edwin Hubble said that the galaxies were moving away from Earth because their light was shifted to the red end of the spectrum, showing that the universe was actually expanding. And if this were true, then it would stand to reason that there was a point from which it all expanded, which is called a singularity, an infinitely small point of infinite density. In other words, it's nothing. This is what Jews and Christians have held to for centuries, that there was once nothing and now there is something. And we obviously understand that the beginner of that something is God. Another issue that is often misunderstood is the use of the word day, or yom in Hebrew. A default reading of the creation story would lend itself to assuming that each of these days were literal 24-hour periods. But that would lead to condensing all of cosmological prehistory, a time that is believed to be 13.8 billion years, into less than a week. In other parts of Scripture, the word day refers to anywhere from a day-like period to the reign of a king, and in English we use the word the same way. The first use of the word day in Genesis actually refers to a time period as distinct from night. And also, because there is no evening on the seventh day, we can see that we are in fact still in the seventh day. So it is not necessary to hold to a 6-day creation model as being literal 24-hour periods. Much of the Bible uses poetic language to describe reality, and while the creation narrative is no doubt poetic, that does not, however, mean that it does not contain the truth that we all believe. As believers, we know that we need to hold to the authority of Scripture, but it does not mean rejecting all of the current scientific thought. Another issue that I would like to mention is evolution and what it really means. If we are asked to talk about this issue, it is often good to ask about what kind of evolution is being mentioned. As Christians, we recognise that there is a distinct difference between micro and macro evolution. Microevolution is the observation that a certain group of species can develop unique characteristics largely based on their environment, whereas macroevolution, as first thought of by Darwin, seeks to explain the origin of life and its subsequent variety of species through natural selection. However, therein lie a number of problems. The first of which is the origin of life from non-life. A question that demands an answer is, from where did the first life come? Many scientists have thought about this issue and have come to many different conclusions. Some say the atmosphere, while others say the oceans, and still others say it was from rocks. The point being that no one agrees. Another issue that is important to consider is that of protein synthesis. The notion that life can arise from non-life is so difficult to assert because of why every cell lives. If you have done A-level biology, you will know about protein synthesis, the process by which the genetic code in cells produces a huge variety of proteins necessary for life. The problem of that is that in order to produce proteins, you require ribosomes, which are themselves made out of protein. You need protein to make more protein. And a functioning cell also needs a bilayer made out of phospholipids, which is necessarily strengthened by protein. The regulation of countless chemical reactions in each cell is facilitated by enzymes, which are also proteins. So in order to make proteins, you first need protein. Another issue that is very important to consider is the information as seen in DNA. The straw that breaks the camel's back is the form and function of this DNA, the most fundamental and most complex molecule in the universe. Werner Gitt, a German scientist, has come up with 5 levels of information, and he posits that DNA is the highest form, which he calls apobetics. It is information that expects a response. And there is not a single example in the history of the universe where such information does not come from an intelligent informer. Another issue that is very important to consider is the origin of man. And if we were to assert that macroevolution is true, we could not believe certain things about the Bible. The first being that man is made in the image of God. Perhaps the most important reason why we cannot believe in Darwin's theory of evolution is that by definition it's atheistic, and it seeks to explain the origin of humanity without God. The Genesis account follows a pattern that ultimately points to the pinnacle of God's creation, which is mankind. The words that God uses switch from "let there be" to "let us make." The most fundamental difference between man and the animals is that he is made in the image of God. And there isn't much proof needed to say that people are altogether different than all the animals. All we need to do is go home and we'll see that. We create, we think, we speak, we are moral, we have meaningful relationships with others, and we ultimately have a soul that goes on after we die. The image of God is inherited from your parents because it was first given by God to Adam. It was an endowment by our Creator with unalienable rights. Such an high and intrinsic value cannot arise from natural processes, and any such attempt must be rejected. Another thing that is essential to believe as a Christian is the historical Adam and Eve. Another non-negotiable about this creation narrative is that there was indeed a historical first man and woman, called by God Adam and Eve. They represent a distinct difference between any other animal, even those that closely resemble us. The reason why Adam and Eve are so necessary to the Christian faith is that we must hold to a real fall, that Adam really did sin. Without such a fall into sinfulness, there is no original sin from which we need to be saved. This ultimately renders our faith in Jesus Christ as the grounds for our salvation totally useless. So we must believe that Adam and Eve were real people, regardless of when we believe they existed. There are so many unanswered and even unanswerable questions in the creation narrative of Genesis because it doesn't seek to explain every single thing about the universe. So we should always be willing to follow the evidence where it leads us. We do not need to, and we should not be willing to allow even the common consensus of science to undermine the very real and necessary truths about God's creation and mankind. For without them, we are nothing more than apes with clothes.